Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today on this episode, I wanted to kind of walk you guys through some of the things that I look for this time of year. You know, the late September, October time period. This is a time of the year that really things are changing very, very rapidly. It's sort of like the spring, you know, when the fish go from, you know, their pre-spawn and wintertime patterns to spawning. Everything's changing so quick based on the conditions. Same thing during the fall, and especially early fall. So what I wanted to do is show you a few of the things that I'm looking for on the reservoirs that I fish. And the reason I make that distinction with reservoirs is that natural lakes don't go through the same exact progression or transitions during the seasons. I think that a lot of fish spread out in natural lakes. They do go through transitions, but they kind of set up different than they do on reservoirs. Reservoirs, you tend to have those more clean cut, you know, seasonal habits. So anyways, so pretty much all the reservoirs that you're gonna go to around the country, especially around the South, you can apply some of these principles and start finding some fish. But anyways, let's go ahead and get to it. All right, so the first thing we got to discuss is like what's going on this time period, late September into October, and it goes into you know, the first half of November. Really the main thing that's happening is the shad migration. Shad are moving way back into some of these feeder creeks, and feeder creeks are the ones that, you know, when you have a good rain, water flushes into the system. And, you know, you've got an actual, you know, a prominent creek that's flowing into the back of this. I'm not talking about like rivers, you know, necessarily like rivers that are constantly flowing all the time. You know, it could be just a creek that has enough water to where there's a creek bed, you know, and when it rains a lot, you know, it flows. Okay, it could be that simple. So for instance, we got this creek right here. Let's go ahead and record my screen here. We got my Navionics app on my iPad. So all right, so we got this creek right here. During the you know, the summertime, a lot of the fish are going to be on the main lake relating to current in this situation. This is Lake Chickamauga. But one of the things that I look for during the fall is those fish will start making the transition in September, and they'll make their way into the backs of these creeks. So one of the first things that I look for during this transition is going to be what we call secondary points. So a primary point or main lake point would be something like this on the main lake, you know, that little point that juts out, or even this one, okay? So that one I would kind of consider like a secondary point too. But secondary points are, you know, points inside of these creek arms. And so a point like this, I know this one right here, it's got a bunch of stumps. It's actually a pretty decent point. That kind of point, that can be one of the first types of structure that fish, you know, meet, you know, as they're moving back there, and they'll sit there and ambush prey for a little bit, you know. So looking for secondary points as you go into the back of these creeks can be really, really good. As those fish progress into the backs here, the next thing I look for, and this is actually one of the biggest keys, because I think that a lot of fish will just hold on this type of spot for a long period of time. But the next thing I look for is where the creek channel bends in towards the shoreline somewhere. Okay, so that, and I'm talking about like towards the back of a creek. So before it gets like dirt shallow, the last channel swing bank where you have the last bit of like, you know, 5 foot of water, or a little bit deeper water relative to the fishery, that's where you want to hang out. So on this, you can't really tell, you know, if you don't know what you're looking at, but this right here is the deepest part. This is a creek channel, and you can see where the contour lines are really close together right here. That is where the creek channel bend is. So that's relatively deep water before you get back here into the shallow flat. So this little spot right here, this can be very, very good you know, anywhere. You know, this is one of the most consistent patterns that I find this time of year is like, if they're not all the way back on the flats yet, and they've, you know, they've started to funnel into these creeks, you can more often than not find them on those channel swing banks. So definitely pay attention to those little deeper areas where the channel swings in to the bank. And usually you can spot it even without a map. You know, if you go into a creek and if you don't have any electronics at all, you can look, and the bank that has the steeper sides is generally going to be the channel swing bank. Usually there's one side that's long, tapering shoreline, you know, that finally meets the water, and then the other side is like a 45-degree bank. Sometimes you got like a little bluff wall or something like that. So fish around that area. Usually you can throw crankbaits, because usually that's a cleaner bottom, because that, you know, that's a spot where the water gets flushed pretty regularly, and generally, you know, the erosion that has happened from that creek bed, you know, unearths a lot of rock and stuff like that. So you can fish jigs, you can fish crankbaits, you can do a lot of things in that location. But after you fish that, you know, the channel swings, the flats, back here on the flats, this is where the last place that those fish are going to go, in, you know, as they follow those shad. So this is going to be really good throughout until it starts getting really, really cold, or the lakes, you know, completely drop. You know, depending on where you live, most of these lakes, they're going to bring down to winter pool and for flooding purposes. But anyways, the flats can be really, really good. And the best thing about the flats is you can go fish small swim baits, chatterbaits, spinner baits, lipless crankbaits. You can do a lot of reaction style techniques on these type of deals, but you have to have the bait. And usually it doesn't take, you know, a whole lot to figure out if there's fish on these flats, because usually you'll see the schools of shad. You'll either see those big dark, it looks like shadow from a cloud, but it's actually just all bait fish, you know, meandering around these flats. And then occasionally you see some fish busting on those shad. That's pretty standard, you know. So, you know, that's the flats are definitely the one of the places that you want to check, and that's usually as you progress into October that you start finding that. So anyways, guys, just wanted to walk you through some of the things that I look for during the fall. You know, there's a lot of things you can do in the fall, but this is following the shad migration into the backs of these creeks. That's what I like to do, and it's one of the best surefire way to catch fish in September and October. So anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, drop a comment below. Other than that, make sure you like, share, subscribe if you enjoy this content, and I'm going to see you out in the water. Make sure you trust the process.